Wonderful. So welcome everyone. I'm seeing folks are still trickling in, so folks can join us as we get started. But today's session of the Lenfest News Philanthropy Network is the first of a three-part series that we have put together on making the case for your local news. And we're going to be hearing from newsroom leaders. Today, we're thrilled to have Chris Baxter, who is going to kick us off. He is the executive director at Spotlight PA, and he's going to answer some of the questions that you have submitted in advance via your registration. Spotlight PA is navigating, the way of making case for local news, how to secure philanthropic support. So Chris is here to talk about the work that he does on that area. This is going to be a conversational session. I have collected the questions that you have submitted in advance for Chris, and so we're going to be going over those, but also feel free to use the chat if you have experiences, challenges, resources that you want to share as well, follow-up questions. We'll be collecting those as you add them to the chat. So Chris, thank you for joining us today. But before we dive into the questions that I have for you, I'd like to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself properly and talk a little bit about Spotlight PA and the work that you do.
Cool, thank you. Thanks to Diana and the Lenfest Institute for putting this on, Annie Madonia, who's part of the Institute, but also part of our board. Great to have you here. When Diana sent me the preview email yesterday for all the people that had registered and all the questions, I was kind of blown away. It's awesome to see such an engaged group, and kudos to you all and to Lenfest for making that community possible. And I like to just start by saying, I think it's important to say that we certainly have not figured everything out. We don't have all the answers, and we learn so much from so many people who are on this call. And so I just like to start with that sort of note of gratitude that this is a sharing community, and we have learned so much from other folks and are so appreciative of that. With that said, there's a lot of folks on here who I have not met, which is pretty cool. A lot of organizations I know, but a lot of you all I don't. So it's great to be here and to spend an afternoon with you. And I've been assured by my 6-year-old that he will not interrupt. So that's the beauty of half-day kindergarten. So Spotlight PA was launched in 2019 as a statewide nonprofit news organization, primarily at its start to answer the dire state of the press corps covering the Capitol and the wider state government. In the 5 years since, though, it has really grown to not only, I think, meet that challenge and mission, but to go far beyond it now to be the largest statewide newsroom in Pennsylvania, covering not just the Capitol and state government, but a lot of other statewide issues, really trying to help connect regions to one another, in addition to Harrisburg, our capital, and also an effort to extend what we're doing locally and regionally through 2 community newsrooms that we've set up, one in State College, covering kind of the north central part of Pennsylvania, which is largely rural, and a second one coming online here in about a month in Berks County around Reading, Pennsylvania, which is the 4th largest city in the state. So we're amidst our 5-year anniversary celebration year. We started at about 6 people and about $750,000 a year when we launched. Today we are 27 people and about a $4 million-ish budget. And one unique aspect of ours is that we have content sharing agreements with 127 newsrooms in Pennsylvania to republish our work. That is a sort of a defined model, meaning it's not an open steal our stuff model. We actually have license agreements with each one of them. The journalism is available for free, but they do have to follow certain rules and make certain things available back to us. So we are republishing very widely across the state, and have very much a sort of distributed audience model in addition to our native audience channels that, we're growing ourselves. I'm thrilled about this conversation. I increasingly find myself becoming a sort of a, I don't know, just really engrossed in the sort of theory and strategy of news communications and why and how people come to the news, and how we need to do a better job reaching them in the lanes where they're making themselves kind of most available. And also how we, really try to speak across the political divide. As I often say, nonprofit and nonpartisan news the beauty of what we do is that it's both nonpartisan and bipartisan, and that we cover a lot of issues and topics that really resonate, across political lines. So yeah, that's where we're at, and yeah, excited to jump in.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Chris. We are delighted to have you here. So there was a lot of questions that people submitted when they were registering for this conversation. I'm going to start with a quick one, and then we can dive more into individual donors and foundations. But I want to start with internally in the newsroom. How do we get your teams aligned around fundraising, right? How does Spotlight PA in particular does that work? How do you do that there? There were a lot of questions around journalists who may be too busy to be part of this work, or journalists that don't see the fundraising aspect as part of their work, right? And so how do you align the newsrooms so that they're all in the same mission, the fundraising efforts that you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the same way we are very aggressive communicators externally, we also are the same internally. And so first of all, we make sure the staff kind of understands like what we are, like what it means to be a nonprofit, and that it's really nothing more than a tax status, and this is a business, and we have to run it like a business. And and if we don't have money to pay for the journalism, we don't have any journalists. So I mean, fundamentally, number one, making sure we're just talking about like this model and what it means. And I think one thing I feel like when I go to a lot of the conferences that I'm lucky to attend throughout the year, I often wish that I was able to bring more of my reporters to those discussions so they could see the kinds of things that leadership and people on the business side were thinking about and grappling with, because I think it's just fascinating from just a pure kind of academic strategic standpoint, but B, it helps, I think, them understand how this all works and the things we have to take into consideration. Will say though that I am very clear with our staff all the time that nothing I do, nothing our development team does, nothing basically anyone does matters without the reporters and good journalism. It starts with them. They are the beating heart of Spotlight PA. I tell them that all the time. They are the core. They are our core asset. You might think, your donors or your funders are your core asset. No, your journalists are your core asset, not your journalism, your journalists, because they are the ones that produce the heart of our product. And so I make sure that they always know that, and that we don't get too lost in everything else when talking with them and forget to recognize that, again, they are the front lines. They are the ones producing the product. And so I think I've found that once they really understand that I understand them, and now I have a bit of a benefit in that I have both some sort of news business side experience, but also I was a reporter for a long time, right? I was an investigative reporter, I was state capitol reporter. I have a very keen understanding of what they go through, and the highs and the lows, and um, and how important it is to, make sure they're doing okay. So once they kind of understood that, as I've seen, as they understand that, they then become actually, I mean, in some cases, even recently, like they almost want to get more involved on the business side than I even want them to necessarily. Like, I'm happy they want to, and we do take advantage of that. But I also am really clear with them that, and to, to the heart of the question, at the end of the day, the business is not the reporter's job. It's my job. It's my our deputy director's job, membership manager's job. Their job is to do really good journalism. And so I don't ever want to put too much on them that it impedes what we need them to do. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have value, right? They're very good messengers. They are on the front lines. They have incredible depth of knowledge. And so we take advantage of that in various ways, but really try to put the bulk of the work, or make sure they understand that the onus for that work is on us. It's not more work for them. I think that's a really important thing to clarify, because if it's coming across to the staff like this is partly your responsibility or it's more work you need to do, then I think you're going to see resistance. And also, like, maybe not necessarily the best use, right, of their time, because any time you're taking from them is time they're not spending on the core product. So yeah, I think the combination of those things has helped us. And also for folks that have expressed interest in doing more, making sure I give them opportunity to do that. I was lucky that in my previous job at the Star Ledger in New Jersey, my, the heads of that company and that newsroom at the time were willing to give me more involvement and insight into the business side of the newsroom when I asked. And so we make sure to do that too with folks that are expressing interest in that.
Totally. So there has to be an alignment. Clearly, there are roles, and everybody should be aware of everyone's roles, but there should be some sort of alignment between, the newsroom and the business sides of the organization. So perfect sense. And then getting buy-in, and getting your team aligned is one thing, but then there is making the case for your local journalism to your audience, right? Your readers, your audience, the people that you are serving. Many people feel that local journalism should be free, or they may not understand that the value and the cost of producing quality, independent reporting, right? So how do you get people to understand that they should be supporting their local journalism financially? Do you have any messaging around that you use for your audience? Any strategies that you use for getting that message and the impact of your reporting, and why folks who are benefiting from your reporting should be contributing and supporting?
Yeah. Let me jump back real quick, because in your summation, your very good summation, you touched on something that I do think is important. I still hear from some of my peers that they encounter this sort of old mentality of like the business side is the business and the newsroom is the newsroom, and they don't, like, it's inappropriate to have, that kind of sentiment. I think in our current world and in our environment, I would say nonprofit, but I actually think it's true nonprofit and for-profit, there is no, like, that is a very damaging way to think. And it's not that the business side should be dictating anything to the newsroom, right? So let's be clear.
Yeah.
But the business side, and this is like a lot of what I do on a day-to-day basis, I understand what our business goals are, what our membership goals are, what we're doing in a certain campaign, whatever. And I deeply understand what the newsroom is doing. And I am able to marry those things when I see opportunity, right? I know the newsroom has this big project coming, and I know that in the past we've seen really good, membership campaign response to that topic. So I might say to the newsroom, hey, can we frame this up? Can we just give this like a project name? Can we just build a little kind of marketing structure around what you're doing so I can kind of sell it on the business side? So that kind of coordination and understanding of what both sides are trying to accomplish, I think is really, really important. I mean, we are able to capitalize. We just did this last week. We had a special election, and one of the races was a very deeply red Trump plus 15 district, and it went Democrat. And our traffic on site was through the roof. And throughout the day, kind of in real time, we were adjusting messaging by email because we were mid-campaign. So we were adjusting, are we going to do a second email? We were adjusting pop-ups on the site to match where the audience was coming from that day, right? And trying to bring that. And we had a fantastic fundraising day off of that. But that's because both sides were kind of working in synergy. And that is really, really so important. And again, to get beyond this idea of like the business side doesn't tell news, like we never tell, like one side is never telling the other side what to do. We're just understanding what we're both doing, because then we see lots of opportunities to do it together. So I think that's a really important point to make. To your question, I mean, to be honest, I have a whole like basically 45-minute stump speech that is the answer to that I give everywhere I possibly can, including just yesterday I was in Allentown with a group, and I'll be in Altoona next week. But the general core components of that stump speech are as follows. Number one, I thank people for taking time to think about the news, because most of them have probably never done that, or certainly not done it recently, even though they're affected and impacted by the news every day. So number one, I thank them for taking the time to understand why it is we get what we get today. Then I explain in greater detail what I just said, which is, how did we get here? Right? How did we get from a point of incredibly profitable and lucrative commercial newspaper companies to where we are today? How did that happen? What were some of the decisions that were made along the way that had a really drastic impact on the type and quality of journalism we get now? And how did that all play out, right? So a little bit of an education, because most people have a very superficial understanding, if any, of what has happened in the past 20 years. So we kind of cover that, the changes in the business model, the onset of the internet, what it meant when newspapers shifted to, instead of charging for content, they shifted to the strategy they knew, which was an ad strategy, just in a digital space, how that led to real, essentially, quantity taking precedent over quality, because that's what that ad model and business model drove, and how that's played out. So we give that. And then from there, we pivot to Spotlight PA and how we're different, right? So how we're charting a new course for news together, hand in hand with the people who live here, right? So we often say we're not saving local news. We're not trying to harken back to yesteryear. We're both remaking it and retaking it, right? This is an opportunity. So this is sort of our first call to action, is that this is an opportunity to take back the news, to take it back to its roots, to its core constitutional purpose in our republic, but also to take it back to answering to who it's supposed to serve. And that is our communities, right? The people. And we have the great benefit in the nonprofit model of having a very simple business proposition, which is we produce journalism that's valuable to folks, and in turn, they support it. And if either of us don't do our jobs, it goes away. And unfortunately, many people have been living with what it's like not to not to have it. But the nonprofit business model orients quality and service to the people above all else. not profits, not shareholders, not some faceless, nameless corporation, not some hedge fund. It's just you and me, right? Me and my 2 kids, and I live here in the state, and I care about the state, and all our reporters who live here and care about this state. So we talk about that how we're trying to blaze a new path forward, and then how we're different, from the past, how we're moving in a better direction again together, right? Really emphasizing this collective power, and collective need to move this together. And in the process, what we're really doing, what all these speaking engagements are really, is they're all a re-education process, because historically news has not been in the discussion of philanthropy primarily, other than public media. And now it is. And I think sometimes we jump to the end statement, right? Which we've all said or hear, which is, well, we have to treat news like we treat the symphony, like we treat the museum, and that's true. The difference is that people have always thought about those things in the lane of philanthropy. They have not always thought about news in the lane of philanthropy. And so we need to bring them along the way as to why that has happened, right? Essentially, that this fundamental pillar of our democracy happened for many, many, many years to be part of a very successful commercial business model. That business model broke, but the role of journalism in our society, in our communities, and the importance of that remained. So now we are tasked, right, with finding a way to preserve that piece in a new way forward, because no one else is going to do it for us, right? And we've seen what will continue to happen if we don't step forward. So if we want something better, we have to collectively do it together. And then, of course, like as my boss in New Jersey used to say, like, Chris, all the talk's great, but you got to put points on the board, right? That's what he was always put. That sounds like a good story. Put points on the board. Actually get it to where we can put it in the paper. So the next pivot, right, comes. You got to have the goods. You got to have the journalism, right? I mean, we never let a good, story or a good piece of impact pass us by. We are always communicating our stories and what they're doing and how they're causing change. I'll say this now, and I'll probably say it 10 other times. We are relentless communicators. We are relentless messengers. We can't do it enough. And so, yeah, so that next step is just showing the goods, like showing the points on the board and the results we're getting. And then finally, just sort of this sentiment that I want people to leave with, which is that Spotlight PA is not, I don't want you to think of us like a charity, right? I want you to think of us like an investment, because we are a really good investment in social good, in the health of our communities and our democracy, but more particularly in actual real change, right? And the electorate wants, like pretty much always, right, wants change from the status quo. And so we want to be, and we are, and journalism is a change agent. We don't have control, right? We're not drafting the legislation. We're not issuing subpoenas as much as I would love that power. But we can cause things to happen that otherwise would not through traditional processes that are out there, like the legislative process or traditional advocacy routes or what have you. So news is a really effective investment for that kind of change. So we really try to tap into the sense that we feel in the public, that they want to do something. They want to get behind something that actually moves the needle. And there's a lot of frustration with politics right now, right? That's very hard. And so we try to tap that vein a little bit and be like, well, we actually really can move the needle. And we have the proof, to show for it. So that's kind of the outline of that, of how the trajectory of that stump speech and how that goes. And I think it's just really important to do those things in process and not assume people have as much knowledge or awareness of why we are where we are today as we do. because they don't. We're the news nerds. They are not. Again, back to that first point, most people have not sat down and taken time to think about why it is we get what we get.
100%. And the message of togetherness really resonates for me, because you're saying, you're doing this work together with your communities, right? So that really resonates. Seeing a lot of comments, very interesting comments about, the language and the importance of, thinking through and being intentional with the language that you use. And also I want to point out, I have a few more questions for Chris, and then I'm going to open up the floor for folks. So if you have questions for him as well, feel free to put them on the chat, and we'll try to get through a few of them. I want to get into the funding part of this, talking to funders and individual donors, organizations. And a lot of people, their questions was very much, what's the first touch, right? How do you even start a conversation? How do you get into that? So do you have a strategy for when you have very limited time and you want to have a first touch point with funders or prospective funders?
Yeah. Well, number one, let me just say that I have a lot of really smart people around me. I mean, I've learned a ton from Annie at Lenfest, other folks at Lenfest. I've learned a ton from our director of individual and corporate giving, Michelle Mertz, our deputy director, Joanna Bernstein. So, it starts with a good team. Like, we all have our strengths. And if it were left up to me, right, impatience would rule the day. And that's often not a good strategy, right? Now you could understand why the CEO would have, because I see kind of what we need to achieve and what's on the line and where we are. And but our team, and I've learned so much from them about how it's really a longer process than that in terms of developing the relationship and really understanding what's motivating someone to give, what it is about us that they find fulfilling. And I'll just share, when I left the Star Ledger, my boss said to me, do you really want to spend all your time fundraising? And I said, well, I mean, if I could go out and raise money for exactly the kind of work I want to do, exactly the kind of work I think we need more of, and I could put every dollar I raise directly into that work and help really good people do that work, then yeah, I'll do that all day long. I'd much rather do that than sit in another meeting, about consumer revenue for our billionaire owners. And so from there, I think what he didn't understand, and what I very much understand now, is that fundraising is about real personal relationships. And when you spend the time to really develop that, like a good friendship, right? Like a good colleague, like a good coworker, it's so rewarding beyond dollars. And that's something that Annie told me when I first started. I remember her telling me that, and I sort of was like, that kind of just sounds like things fundraisers say. But no, it's really true. And so to do that, right, a couple things. Number one, you have to be really genuine. And I try to really share a lot of myself when I talk to people, right? About my kids, my family, what we're doing, what we're struggling with, I talk about how much I like to garden, the struggle with the deer, and just I want to be real. I want people to know I'm a real person. And number two, I want them to see my passion, right? I think one of my greatest assets that I bring as CEO is a passion and understanding of this business, this industry, the work, and what it can do. But from there, yeah, it can be a process, right? And of course, you've got folks who give $5 in a year, and you've got folks that might give 50,000, 100,000, $1 million, and it's a different approach with each of them, because we only have so much time in the day. But there's a lot of big and little things we do, and that we continue to develop to improve that stewardship and to make sure people are staying engaged. And I could go into more specifics because that goes in a lot of different directions. But I will say overall, like one of our guiding principles is that we seek to disrupt people's expectations of the news. Their expectations of us have gotten so low. Expectations of news companies have gotten so low, of customer service, of you name it. The flip side of that kind of bad position is that there's incredible opportunity to disrupt those negative expectations of us. And so in everything we do on a day-to-day basis, big and small, we really seek to disrupt people's expectations of what they expect us to be. And every time we do that, you create a moment that generates connection and some loyalty and some trust. Um, and it's incredibly effective. And we've done it, again, in big and small ways and seen the same results.
Yeah. How do you, when having these conversations and trying to secure funding, how do you find balance between maintaining the editorial independence, but also making sure that you secure the funding that you need to do your work?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, this really has not been an issue for us, but we do watch for a few things. So number one, like we don't want to get ourselves tied into too much restricted funding to the point where we can't actually be nimble and responsive because too much of our funding is tied into like really tight restricted lanes. So not to say that we don't do that, we do, but we're very careful to make sure that that doesn't become too much of the pie. Number two is, we're really honest and candid with people. Like if I'm meeting with a prospective major donor and I feel like the conversation is feeling a little kind of more of the political realm, right? Of like, I do this, you do that. I'm just really honest because at the end of the day, like not being honest and maybe taking that money and then having a problem is far worse than just being upfront. And um, and so, but I will say like the vast majority of people, when they're at the point of having a conversation about supporting news, they generally get the deal. Like they generally get what it is and what it isn't. And
I'm actually curious to hear, like, if anyone feels differently, like, put it in the chat and let us know, because I'm curious to hear, like, does everyone feel that same way? Like, it's generally, does the message get across when you're trying to have these conversations? So if you have any thoughts on that, I'll welcome them on the chat. But go ahead, Chris.
yeah, no, I can leave it there, but I can talk more if there's specific questions.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you. And again, I'm gonna open up the floor in a few minutes. So if anybody has any questions or follow-ups, we can get into that. As we, getting closer to wrapping up this Q&A, a lot of folks wanted to hear about your biggest lessons. As you have navigated this role and launching the fundraising efforts for Spotlight PA, folks want to hear about your biggest challenges and your biggest lessons that you have learned in this work. And so I know that's open, but I'm leaving it open on purpose because I want to see where your head takes you in terms of your challenges and lessons. So if you want to share, like any lessons or challenges, specifically trying to secure your funding, any story that comes to mind for the room for folks, go ahead. And also in the chat, if folks want to share about your experiences, please feel free, because we would like to hear from others as well that are here, that are doing the work. I'm going to check the chat real quick as well to see if there's any questions from folks. The chat has been popping, so I'm trying to see if I can keep up with what was being. And also, I think everybody should have the option to unmute. So if folks want to just raise your hands and ask your questions directly, that actually works perfectly fine as well. Seeing some interesting conversations taking place. And then
yeah, I see
like
Michael's comment about language, and I wrote a little bit about that recently. I mean, I think we do have to be really careful not to lock ourselves into one sort of language lane in the way we talk about news, because that lane is going to appeal to some people and not others. And there's lots of different ways to talk about the news, right? You could talk about the news as a social good, as a fundamental part of democracy, as, sort of connective tissue for our communities. But you could also talk about it as a bastion for fiscal responsibility, right? For accountability of our leaders, for tracking our tax dollars, for fulfilling a central constitutional mandate, which journalism very much has, right? It's the only profession specifically named in the Constitution. Journalism's role protecting personal liberties, right? Protecting against government overreach. You can see how, like, depending which term and way we choose to talk about news, it might appeal to a different person. That language might resonate differently with different people. And so I think that is really, really important to think about. And then also to consider some of the topics that I think traditionally, and I don't mean everyone, but I just think generally, traditionally, majority, we in news maybe haven't been so super comfortable with, right? Topics like the military, patriotism, veterans, big business and industry, understanding, like really understanding the economy, and the role of business and industry in that economy, that have very large and diverse followings. But if we're not able to speak these languages, we are not going to connect with the people who connect with those topics the most. And so I think and I know I've seen in the chat that I know Press Forward is doing some work on this in terms of messaging. And I think it's a really important area for us to focus on and be careful not to, again, only limit ourselves to one kind of language lane. Not to say that like the primary language lane of democracy and holding power to account, the sort of typical lane we're in, not to say that's not effective or important. It is both, but it just can't be the only kind of messaging that we are putting out.
Right. At the end of the day, we have to focus on providing the information that our communities need and that will help them in their day-to-days, right? So I'm going through the chat and there's a few questions. Samantha Ruff asks, how do you get your for-profit minded board members to understand the value of fundraising and participate?
I mean, for us, it hasn't really been a problem. Maybe others on the call. For us, our board very much understands kind of what we're trying to do. I will say that, like, it's been a little bit of, not with the board, but like even with Joanna, our deputy director, who's all things amazing and runs, really runs the ship. But early on, like I'm a relentless messenger, relentless marketer, and I think we have to be. But I remember at the beginning, even Joanna was kind of like, "Oh, should we really be sending this many, fundraising notes? Should we really be like this forward? Isn't it sort of impolite?" And I think, and she would tell you this for sure, over time, she has come to understand the model and the strategy, and also like the proof is in pudding, like the results of our grassroots giving and growth, right? I just speak to the strategy, but it also goes back to what I said earlier, which is that in essence, this is all a re-education campaign, right? And the fundraising is about educating the audience too. That what we do is only possible with them. And that's not just a tagline, that's not just a saying, it is the truth. And so we really need them to understand that. And I think we can't be afraid to draw on some of the fundraising tactics that have been proven to work, whether in the political space or by other nonprofit organizations. Again, not doing anything that's, dirty or, misleading or whatever. We're not going there. But there's a lot of people out in the world that raise a lot of money that are not news and have learned a lot and have big operations about how that works and why it works. So we'll draw from anything and everything. And it's gotten to the, I'm so into the grassroots giving, like it's just my kind of obsession. That I like analyze every solicit I get in the mail now from like any organization. I look at the envelope, I look at the messaging, I look at the packaging. I tell my wife, oh, I really like this and I hate this. And like, or I get something and I'm like, I've always hated that I get this thing and it's in like size, 16 or 18 font, but I'm like, but why are they doing that? Like, are they doing that for a reason? Do they know their readers are older? I just kind of think all about that and become kind of a student of it. Um, and yeah, we've had really good results by by following that course.
I saw a few heads nodding, and also on the chat, people relate to the same. Let's talk a little bit about influencers. Somebody posted on the chat, how do you make the case for supporting your local journalism when a lot of the younger audiences tend to rely on influencers for their news and information?
Sorry, was that open for the group or was that to me?
Everything I'm asking, if anybody in the group, I'll reiterate, if anybody in the group has any comments on anything that we're having, that we're talking about, please chime in. If not, Chris, you can take it. But I think Bob Butler actually has some thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Diana. One of the things that we're doing, and I think you're spot on with the question, is we are experimenting with short form video on social media and different sort of topics and content type to try and understand what resonates with basically, I guess I would say mostly under 40-year-olds. So basically 20 and 30 something. So we have 2 fellows from local colleges who are working on producing that content under the direction of our marketing person and the newsroom, with the idea that if we can build an audience there, we'll figure out how to monetize it later. But we need to figure out what kind of content is important to them. So we're trying to work with our local Chamber of Commerce young professional group to get their input and feedback on our content.
Thank you for sharing. Chris, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, it's something that we're still trying to figure out. Like we are integrating more video work into our team. Now we started last fall with a new partnership with some commercial TV stations, and that started to kind of just build the muscle among the staff and reporters and see the workflow, kind of get excited about it. So now we're, moving in more of those directions. We're just like, we're trying to do it responsibly. Like this isn't pivot to video 12.0. I want them to really understand like we're doing these things for these specific reasons, and these are the boundaries in terms of how much time and resource we're going to allocate or not. Because if we go beyond that, what's the cost of that to the other, to whatever we're taking away from, which in terms of reporters, again, is the core product. So we are very careful about that. But B, just, like what is the potential return, right? I mean, there's audience building generally, and then there's audience building to the point that we're, like our key performance indicator is new subscribers, or then there's building where the key indicator is new donors. So depending on where we are in that spectrum, we only want to allocate so much time and resource, knowing what the return, would look like. And that's tricky with social video and such, because it tends to be mostly in the first category of audience building, which is kind of the hardest to, understand your ROI on. But nonetheless, we do think that it's clearly important. I mean, the last election showed us just how much people are turning to social personalities, Substack personalities, podcast personalities. And so I think we're more focused on just like increasing efforts to personalize our journalism and to personalize our reporters, which isn't actually inconsistent with a lot of things we've been doing along the way. It's just a different channel to do it. And video, has a different kind of emotional connection with people.
Yeah, and there's some interesting comments on the chat here. about, well, somebody asked actually whether folks have had success with influencer partnerships. So if anybody has any thoughts on that, please share. I think this was Amber who asked. And then somebody talked about, this is Sean said, do we agree as an industry that developing community impact data related to our reporting is useful, or should we only be focused on messaging and marketing? So there's like a little balance, right, that needs to happen. You talked a lot about your marketing and your, I think you said messaging. I don't know if you said ruthless messaging, Chris, maybe you did, but
Relentless.
Relentless, that was the word. Thank you. So how do you find the balance in there between like the marketing and the messaging versus the community impact?
Well, to me, they're one of the same, right? The impact is the goods. Like the journalism, the impact are the goods. It's then my job to message around the goods, right? So, like, right, and we're currently just in this like wonderful period right now where it feels like every other day we have an amazing story, and it's like great on the one hand, but the like business marketer CEO side of me is like, wait, slow down. Like I want to maximize the potential of each one of these, and I can only kind of focus and message out one at a time. But yeah, they really go hand in hand, and understanding the impact is really, really important, and we track that very closely. Because again, people, we're trying to position journalism again as that investment. And so we have to show people that that's true, right? We do actually, we are an impetus for positive change. So yes, the impact tracker is great. We have an internal version of the impact tracker. The reporters report into it anything that comes of their reporting, big or small, and we sort of categorize it. And then that allows us to report that out, but also kind of total it up over time, which we just did for the first time for this 5-year impact report we're putting out. And we found that we've saved, or returned to taxpayers $20 million over the first 5 years. We've caused 36, policy changes, 14 new pieces of legislation, 8 legal victories, including some cases that were precedent setting. I mean, these are impressive. Even we were like, oh wow, that's pretty good. I'm glad we took the time to add them up. That's real stuff. That's real change. And that's really important to the message. Messaging can't just be hollow. Like marketing alone is not enough. I think sometimes we talk about like we need more marketing. Well, it's like, well, we need everything else. And then yes, we need effective people to communicate or to kind of extract the value of what we're creating. But yeah, impact is really important.
Yeah. And I just want to ask this, Leslie pointed this out. Have you ever had to ask a reporter when there is a person that you reported on that is a donor? Have you had to ask the reporter to be respectful or to be careful of the way that they communicate?
Not really. I mean, sometimes they'll get a message where someone mentions they're a donor and that makes them a little uncomfortable, and they usually forward that to me, and then like I take care of it. Or if I get messages in, I tend to, it's my job to interact, and I'll pass along the note, but I won't necessarily put the person directly in contact with the reporter unless the reporter wants to be. One system that we don't have yet that I would very much like, and that the newsroom would like, is an ability to kind of scan a story and flag any names that are in our donor list, so we could disclose it with stories when a donor might be involved. Now that probably doesn't really matter for folks at kind of grassroots levels, but at higher levels, the newsroom is not, they don't always know. They might be writing about a donor, or there might be a donor in a story, and we always want to be as transparent as possible. So we've been looking at, even with some AI potential to kind of help us with that, just to flag where that might be the case, just so we can add a little kind of like disclaimer at the bottom, or like a notation in the story. The same way, like when we write a story and it has a quote from the State News Media Association, we always write that we're a member of it. Like, we're just trying to be as transparent as possible.
100%. Libby asks, how do you calculate public benefit through money saved?
Yeah, so in our case, we just like I don't have a complicated formula for it. We just have several stories where there was just like clear and obvious cost savings or money returned to the public, or spending that was going to be lost by a government agency that was then recovered as a result of our reporting. So we're just lucky to have enough examples of that we can add it up. The overall like public benefit is way higher than that number. But I only really wanted to total things that I like really can prove, and not kind of back it up with some clever algorithm or something that which certainly, again, is certainly the case. Like, there's all kinds of public benefits that can be boiled down to real dollars. But I think it gets, to Livy's question, that can get a little tricky.
I am seeing several folks who have posted very interesting resources and links. We will be collecting those so that we can share them back with you. So please feel free to continue to add them, and we'll make sure that everybody gets them after the session. We have about 5 minutes or so to go. So I just want to open up the floor for any last questions for Chris. I also want to ask Chris, I sent you yesterday a bit of an overview as to what we were going to discuss today, but I wanted to know if there is a particular point that we haven't touched on that came up for you that you might want to talk about or dive into in the last few minutes we have.
One of our great strengths is that there aren't many people out on the ground talking to people about the news, showing up in their communities, having a conversation with them, educate them. And so I think there's a lot of power in that grassroots game, and I invest a lot of my time in that. Basically anyone and everyone who asks, I will show up. If it's a Rotary, League of Women Voters, retirement community, law firm, a group, a chapter of some association, you name it, I will be there. And I will tell you that, like, I've had ones that were almost 4 hours away and I had to stay overnight and there were 10 people there. And I am like, ugh, like, they are always worth it. I don't think I've had a trip yet where, just even in donations, like, I didn't get enough to be 3 to 5x my time and cost. It's always worth it to go out and do that. So I think it just goes back to the thing I guess I kind of say all the time, which is like, if you think you're messaging enough, you're probably not. And if you're feeling any hesitance, it's rude, again, I'm not advocating to be rude or to be annoying, but like, I do think a lot of us, when I talk to peers, it feels like they could be messaging more. And that's not always just saying like an email campaign asking for money, right? But messaging from me, from the staff, making sure like, we've been doing some direct mail cold acquisition of donors. So that means that we have a growing number of donors who we actually don't have their email address for. So we now have a series of hard letters that will go out to anyone that either who's a donor and we don't have your email address, or you're a donor and you've unsubscribed. So you're no longer getting our digital messaging. We send quarterly updates on our impact and journalism by mail to those people, because we want to make sure we're stewarding that group too, because that's an important group. So thinking about too, what those different lanes of where people are, and making sure, your messaging is reaching all of them, and making sure your messaging is, as much about asking for support as it is proving why they should support you, right? Communicating the wins, the impact, the great stories. And it doesn't, like, I think some people feel like they don't have enough. And like, one thing I learned in the early years was you don't need massive journalistic wins 365 days a year. You just need like 3 to 5 good ones a year, because most people, and this includes like foundation funders, program officers, they don't have the time or the bandwidth to like know everything. They only have the time or the input space for like 3 to 5 good examples. So just like really focus on those 3 to 5, really powerful messages you want to send in that half of the year. And that's really all you need to, really message forward and communicate.
That is such a wonderful, powerful way to end this first session of this series. So I just want to thank you, Chris, so much for your time, for your insights. I'm pretty sure we all learned a lot today. I know I did. And so thank you for being here. Thank you to all of you who joined us as well in the conversation. We are going to put this recording and all the resources that were shared in the chat together for you all. And we'll share them before our next time, which is going to be on April 17th, 2 weeks from now. And we're going to be talking to Kimberly Griffin, who is the publisher and the Chief Revenue Officer at the Mississippi Free Press. Thank you. Thank you all so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Diane.